Make your phones on mute. Said, hi, Member Carroll.
I'm now. Good afternoon. You guys can hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome.
How are you, sir?
Member Von Parrish, you look like you're holed up in the presidential bunker there.
Well, it's maybe a little bit today. So, hi, Member Rosen.
Good afternoon.
Member Rosen.
Everybody doing well?
Yes.
Yes.
Sir.
Hey, everybody.
Okay. We'll get started here. Good morning. My name is John Von Paris, and I am serving. Oh, excuse me. Good afternoon. My name is John Von Paris, and I'm serving as the chairman for the MDTA Finance Committee meeting this afternoon. I hereby call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order at 1:02 p.m. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the live streaming law, this meeting is being conducted via video conference and being live streamed on the MDTA Finance Committee webpage. All members will have their video active during the entirety of the meeting. I ask that anyone who is presenting or answering a question to please turn your video and audio on when speaking. When you are done, please turn your video off and put your audio on mute. To minimize background noise during the call, I would ask that anyone on the line please mute your phones except when speaking. There are no members of the public, no elected officials, and no members of the media pre-registered to speak at today's meeting. At this time, we will move on to agenda item number 1, the May 11, 2021 open meeting minutes. Has everyone received a copy? And are there any questions or comments?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from the Finance Committee meeting in May.
Okay, we have a motion from Member Rosen.
Member Ardinger. Member Ardinger, I'll second.
Okay, second by Member Ardinger. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. The minutes are hereby approved. Item number 2, we will move on to item number 2, fiscal year 2021 budget amendment. Number 4, and Christina Thompson will be presenting today. Good afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon. I'm here to request approval to amend the fiscal year 2021 operating budget by an increase of $8 million. This represents an increase of 2.6% above the previously amended FY21 operating budget. According to the trust agreement, the budget can be amended at any time during the current fiscal year. Throughout the course of this fiscal year, MDTA staff has implemented numerous measures to constrain costs. However, this year hasn't been anything but ordinary, which has resulted in the need for multiple budget amendments. The first amendment reduced the budget by $19 million in response to declining revenues associated with COVID-19 and other customer-focused business decisions. The second amendment increased the budget by $1.4 million to restore a COLA for civilian employees and grant a step to the police. The third amendment was for a $1,000 bonus for all employees. The COLA step and bonus were granted by the governor. Consistent with the MDTA board's direction, staff worked diligently to identify savings to cover costs related to the employee bonuses and the restoration of COVID-19 response pay for the police. Although savings were identified within salaries and benefits, there are other line items that will be overspent due to an increase in costs. The most significant area where projected spending is expected to exceed the budget is the Easy Pass Service Center costs. The overspending of roughly $8 million is primarily the result of not rolling over fiscal year 20 underspending when video tolling mailings were paused, increased video toll transactions as a result of AET, and transition delays. Mainly, the budget assumed lower cost per unit. In order to sustain toll revenue, MDTA did not take action to reduce the processing of backlog transactions to reduce operating costs. The proposed amendment is needed to ensure that fiscal 21 expenses do not exceed the budget and violate the trust agreement. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from any of the members?
Yeah. Hi, Chris. It's Member Rosen. Just a quick question with regard to the for the transition delays. So when we say our budget assume lower cost per unit, so that means that under the new contract, our cost per unit is lower, but because we did not transition earlier, we were under the higher cost per unit from the prior contract. Is that accurate?
Actually, the budget assumed a lower cost per unit from the new 3G contracts, and we really scrubbed the way it was being calculated and found out that there were differences in the calculations.
So we're not going to have a lower cost per unit going forward under this contract?
I'm hoping Deb's not on here yet. She did all the calculations. Can I defer that question?
That's fine.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. We can certainly come back to this item unless Deb is going to join us here. Tara. Why don't we come back to this this item, and then we can have the questions answered, and then we will.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. We'll come back. Chris, that's all you have at this point?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Looks like Will wants to say something.
I think I can probably help with this. As Member Rosen, to your question, you are correct. The unit cost for processing the notices of toll due is lower than what it was on the previous contract. And as you indicated, many months back, Deb had reported that we were operating at roughly $1 million increase per month because of additional consultant costs and also the delta between the costs associated with the lower units in the caption, the TransCore contracts, than the conduit contracts. So there is an increase in costs associated with that. The larger portion of this, though, however, when we're talking about the changes in the units, is the quantities. The structure of the bid sheet was set up for cash operation. In the conversion to all electronic tolling, we did have a lot more units of video transactions that need to be processed. So two things within the bid sheet, the pay items have increased associated to how many EasyPass accounts we have, because we have seen a significant increase in EasyPass. And secondly, due to the significant increase in the quantity of the notices of toll due. So does that answer your question?
It does. Well, and presumably the additional costs that we're incurring, though, because it's now more EasyPass, we're going to have higher collections on than what would have been the case previously.
That is correct to some degree. It is there's a certain number of transactions that are necessary for an individual EasyPass customer to take to more or less make the discount worth it, if you will. If you're a one-time a year user, the cost for the transponder and the cost associated with the video having a higher toll rate than the Easy Pass. Technically, there are certain customers where there could be some savings to the state if they did not have an Easy Pass. But the vast majority of our customers that leverage Easy Pass, it is more cost effective for us.
Okay. Thanks, Will.
Sorry, it took me a while to get on camera here. So.
Okay, and any other questions?
Member Ardinger, I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around this additional 8 million and how it's related to the Easy Pass. Is this something related to the delay, and going forward we would see it be more cost effective, or I guess I'm getting confused, or is this something that is an ongoing expense that we're going to be dealing with?
So it's a little bit of both. So you're going to get a report on both FY21 and 22 during this briefing. The FY21 number goes up less than 22, but then when we look out in our numbers, when we see out 23 and forward, they start to decline because we took backlog. If you think about the backlog that we've been talking about month to month, the backlog started in March and went through June, which was tolling from technically FY20 that has now been shifted forward. And so what we should have been talking about when we had FY20 under budget is the rollover that needed to occur in FY21. However, one of the challenges that we've had with the backlog, and all of us, I can remember talking about the pandemic in March of 20 and joking with people that I thought it would be over in a couple of weeks. And here we are years later, and it's obviously at least I was wrong about how long the pandemic lasts. So some of the assumptions that we made early on about how long this rollover would carry forward is the product of, why, as Chris mentioned, the backlog from 20 is getting moved into 21, and that's a big component of that 8 million. That's part of it, okay? However, all electronic tolling, when the bid sheet was set up for the contracts, it was set up for cash collection. So with cash collection, there's actually items within the contract for installing equipment for the cash, but much of the cost with cash collection, MDTA bears by the costs of our toll collectors and the people who are actually processing cash. We never have reduced those costs to date because our toll collectors have been assisting us with screenings and other activities associated with COVID. But there are more costs associated with AET related to mailings and other things that have not yet been offset by other reductions that you should see during AET. So that's another component. So there's backlog component, AET component, and the Easy Pass accounts. We do have more Easy Pass accounts than what were predicted, and that's something that the bid sheet assumed one number. That's what our budget was based on. We have good news story. We have seen people enrolling in Easy Pass. We always want that, but there are costs associated with us processing Easy Pass transactions. Does that address your question?
Yes, thank you.
And Deb, you're welcome to add. I jumped in here to try to help.
Oh, sorry. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I was late. I was actually working on the budget some more and just was entrenched in it and lost track of time. So I think Will did a nice job explaining, FY, the cost for the budget amendment. And I'm assuming, Will, you also addressed the fact that we the rates are higher under the conduit contract than the TransCore and CAPS contract. And so we assumed transition earlier and we didn't experience those savings. And so when we reduced the budget also for this line item as part of our COVID actions to mitigate, we just cut too far.
Member Rosen had asked a question on that, and we did clarify that. At least I hope I did, Member Rosen.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I appreciate the Will and Chris and Deb answering these very good questions from the members, addressing them. Appreciate that very much. I'm sure they do. So is there a motion?
So moved, Member Rosen.
I'll second that, Member Carroll.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Member Carroll? Member Carroll, did you vote?
Aye, sorry, it's on you.
That's okay. And that's unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Deb, and all those who participated in this discussion. Very good. We will move on to item number 3, and that's fiscal year 2022 final operating budget approval. And Jeffrey Brown is here. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, my name is Jeffrey Brown, Budget Director for the MDTA. I'm here to review and ask approval for the full year 22 operating budget. The full year 22 operating budget reflects updated operations to align with our new realities as we emerge from the impact of COVID-19. And this does include a full transition to all electronic tolling. The proposed budget is $360.8 million, which is a $26.5 million or 7.9% increase versus the full year 22 preliminary budget. Due to COVID-19 cost containment actions in previous years, we are comparing to the preliminary full year 22 budget instead of the amended full year 21 budget, as we think that's a more applicable comparison. The preliminary 22 budget represents a post-COVID-19 budget, but it did not account for full year 21 transactions that were processed in full year 22 or the full all electronic toll transition. Just for your information, Table 1 graphically compares some of the various budgets. In addition, Attachment 1 shows the detailed comparisons between the full year 22 preliminary budget and our recommended final budget. To get into more detail, the total salaries and benefits increased by $1.1 million. Civilian and police increased by $0.9 million, and this net effect is due to 2 major issues. The first is a one-time $500 bonus, some police step increases, COLAs, and a fiscal series classification upgrade that increased the budget. This increase was $3.7 million. On these couple bullet points, we showed the total impact rather than the variance. So the variance is $3.7 million for that portion. The personal turnover reduction was realigned as well to 5.3% to reflect historical activity. This decreased the budget by $2.8 million. So the 2.8 versus the 3.7 got to the 0.9 million. In addition, the Maryland State Police budget increased by 0.2 million. Moving on to the non-personal budget pieces, which were most of the increases were. This portion increased $25.4 million, primarily due to toll collection costs, such as Easy Pass transition and ongoing costs. Communications, which is Object 3, increased to $132,000. This was primarily due to the enabling of GPS location for radios, and that's found in telecommunications Object 0303, which was worth $125,000. Vehicle operations and maintenance, Object 7, increased by $236,000. And this is primarily due to purchased vehicles, which is 0701, and that's to replace damaged or destroyed or lost vehicles. Contractual services, Object 8 increased 26.8 million, and this was due to toll collection costs. The Easy Pass service cost, 873, increased 22.4 million, and that's driven by the increased transaction volumes due to the full year 21 backlog we were talking about before, and the migration to full all electronic tolling. These expenses are expected to decrease in the subsequent years with the backlog completion and with increased Easy Pass usage and the adoption of other payment options such as mobile applications. Easy Pass retail fees increased 4.2 million, and this is due to increased volumes in electronic toll payments. Janitorial services, Object 0813, increased 333,000 due to a new Point Breeze contract, additional weekend cleaning at certain facilities, and facilities which were previously under construction have reopened and they're now using these services. Building repairs and maintenance, 0812, increased 333,000 due to increased traffic control devices, expected sludge removal, and contracts for roof and fire extinguisher inspections. Supplies and materials, Object 9, decreased 1.4 million, and this was driven by Easy Pass transponders, which decreased 1.5 million, and that's from the continued inventory drawdown and reduced contract costs. Maryland State Police non-personnel costs decreased 461,000, and this was due to a reduced overhead rate. All the remaining sub-objects came to an increase of 158,000 across all the remaining objects. That concludes my presentation, and be happy to take any questions at this time.
Any questions for any members? Okay.
Member Von Paris, I'm sorry, this is
Yes.
Member Ardinger. I did have a question. I'm looking at the salary and wages. When I see the percentage of 260.5 and 1732, that stands out, but it looks like net, it's really just a 0.5%. So is this just, I know you referenced there's been some increases, but overall it comes down to a 0.5% increase? Am I looking at that correct?
Are you looking at total salaries and wages, the total amount?
Yeah, I'm looking at attachment 1, and then I always look at the percentage difference, and those two stand out to me, but it looks like it nets down to a 0.5% difference.
Well, in purely, Object 1, you're right, it's 0.5%.
Okay.
So and Member Ardinger, the line item that you're looking at, the miscellaneous payroll adjustments, that's COVID response police pay. So it's a part of it was paid in fiscal year 21, and it's one of the unexpected costs that we had that we've covered with other savings, but we couldn't therefore use that savings for Easy Pass costs. So this is the piece that's paid in FY22. And so since it's really like a one-time expense, it's captured in that line item, and that's why there's the dramatic change.
Okay, thank you.
Very good
Hey,
question.
Deb, question for you as well. I'm sorry, I just had it. Line 873 on contractual services shows 100% nearly increase there. Can you just give some daylight as to what is driving that kind of increase year over year?
Yes. Okay. So this dovetails right with the conversation that Will had started for us involving the budget amendment and costs associated with backlog and AET, and is a big driver of it. So we had in 21, right, we've had some of the backlog from when we paused mailings and stuff like that we didn't account for rolling into 21, from 20 to 21. Well, now this 10 million of this number is tied to backlog. And so if we were looking at the 23 budget, it would be roughly $10 million less. So from a backlog, pre-AET perspective, we're talking about a 50% increase. And these are caption transcore costs. This is the line item for our tolling system. And that's associated with additional expenses with AET. An example would be our volume of notices of toll due that we mail are significantly higher with AET. Now, so is the toll rate higher for NOTDs, but we have costs for image review, we have DMV lookups, we have mailings for the customers that don't pay, we have citations, we have court. So we have more expenses because our video tolls are increasing, but again, the video toll rate is higher on the revenue side, and you're not seeing that side of it. You're just seeing the expense side here. And so with AET, we have a shifting of where our expenses are. And in some cases, they're higher expenses, but there's offsets when you look at it on a net basis.
Okay, thank you. A follow-up question is, at some point, can the board expect the authority to produce for us an aggregate and perhaps even like detailed accounting of what the total cost of this backlog has been? I mean, there are numbers that shoot, and I can't keep track of them all, but it seems like it's going to be a big number.
Yes. Yeah. And so we can produce, something along the lines where we're talking about volumes and cost. Now, the piece that has remained true to date is anything associated with the backlog, we've never paid twice for it. So, for example, there's roughly 10 million mailings of backlog from FY21 for NOTDs. Well, had those mailings occurred under conduit, we would have paid for them there. But we're not. We're instead paying for them here. So we can go through and talk about volumes, but even with these increases numbers and backlogs, what the backlog is doing is it's shifting when our expenses are incurring which fiscal year, but they're not the result to date where we've paid for something twice.
Okay, so I think I follow what you're saying. So we're pushing expenses or pushing collections, further out. I assume though there is some attached expense to all of this. There's a, I guess, time value of money. There's some calculation that would say, hey, were it not for this delay, we would not have spent X number of dollars.
Yes.
Hey, Deb, let me jump in for a second because I think this is getting a little confusing. Remember, Carol, I think a lot of this expense has more to do with the fact that we're going AET, which is more expensive to do than cash. Okay. And so obviously the pandemic is what flipped the switch for us to go to AET. And now that we're staying on AET, our expenses are a little higher due to the things that Deb just talked about, DMV lookup, the mailings, and all those other issues that we did not anticipate pre-COVID, or quite frankly, 3 years ago when this contract was let. As we move more people to Easy Pass, then those expenses will decrease. So the problem is that we went from about 4% video to about 32% video. That's where our expenses really increased. Again, which we're not anticipating. Nobody anticipated a 100-year pandemic. It didn't happen. No one did. And the fact that we're saying AET because AET is, quite frankly, a better long-term solution. It has short-term impacts. That's, I think, the key. And I think it may be a better way to explain it that way. It's not really the backup, the backlog. because we were either going to pay conduit or we're going to pay Transcore. And we actually paid Transcore a little less than we paid conduit. So we were going to pay for that backlog either way. Either way, we were going to pay for those NOTDs. But it's the increased number of NOTDs that is causing a lot of this impact. And I hate to say this, but I got to get on a call with Greg Slater. He changed a meeting on me about an hour ago, but I'll hang on for another. He's always late. I'll hang on for a few minutes and then shift over there.
Okay, so Jim,
I hope I answered that.
I think you clear. So I'm hearing two things. There's a transition cost that you could associate. And there is revenue that's been pushed out because of the delay. My question still remains, though, is there some way to say, maybe there isn't a cost, but is there some level of cost associated with stopping tolling notices going out last year, delaying that the authority has to absorb in addition to those two previous costs that I mentioned? Because it would seem to me that there's something in that that's causing stress on the system that would have been there as part of the transition, but has somehow been heightened or elevated as a result of now having a transition and a delay take place.
Right. So let us go back and see if we can separate the issues. Okay. Because it will be a little complex, I believe. But again, if we would have produced the NOTDs instead of having a backlog, we'd still have a cost.
Right.
And that cost would be higher because of the number of NOTDs that we were doing instead of cash. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so you're right. So that's one part of the equation, I guess I would say. And then the other part of the equation is when it impacts us, which is what Deb was talking about, now or later. And so, yeah, let us go back and see if we can't kind of quantify that information.
If I could interject one more point here on this. It's a point that we've made a couple of times in 3G updates when we've gotten questions about the backlog. One of the big challenges with the backlog is that a very large percentage of the backlog is image-based transactions. And Jim has used this analogy of you don't know what to expect on your credit card statement until you receive it. And we do have part of that issue where because the backlog is image-based, until it processes through the system to where we know what they are and know the toll rates that are applied and we know the costs associated with it, because so much of the backlog is image-based and it's from customers who do not have a properly mounted transponder and who will ultimately move to be an Easy Pass customer, even though it was a video transaction. That quote unquote iToll is technically going to be an Easy Pass. It's enormously difficult for us to actually estimate a dollar amount of the backlog as a result of the transactions being image-based until they are processed. So we've heard the question around this quite a few times, and we're trying to figure out a way to satisfy the question about the cost of the backlog while not really being able to very precisely and accurately tell you the dollar amount of what the backlog is. We can give you a range based on averages of tolling and averages of processing, but with the level of grant, when you're talking about budget amendments of $8 million, the range could be at that order of magnitude. And is that really helpful? So we've kind of struggled with quantifying the backlog in terms of dollars because of the fact that they're image-based and they're not processed yet.
Okay. Thanks, Will.
Yeah. For example, let me just, the best example is we don't know what the image is until we know what the image is, as Will said. And so, for example, the best example is we don't know if it's a truck or a car. And there's a significant difference in dollar value between those two. And so until we see the image, we don't know if it's a truck or a car. And so that's why Will says we could do a range based on historical numbers, because we know approximately how many trucks go through, how many passenger cars go through, how many three axle vehicles go through. So it's 3, 4, 5, 6 axles plus the 2 actual passenger vehicles. It could be a combination of one of those, which all have different price values. So that's why we can give a range, but like Will said, it may be off by $10 million here or there, either way. So that's what we're trying to. That's what we're really struggling with, because we don't know what the image is. We don't know what the toll rate is until we see the image, and we haven't seen the images.
Yeah, and remember, Carol, not to pile on, that's not my intention. The other piece that we need more time for is, where is the actual collections? What's our actual collection rate on these notices that have been delayed in the mailing? If at the end of the day, our collection rate is right in line with historically where we are, then in some respects we'll save money, because we will have collected the same amount of money, but our cost to process would have been less. If our collection rate is lower than historical because of the age of the notices, well, then there will be a cost. So I think understanding the timing of when you would like to see something really affects significantly the amount of assumptions that we need to build in. If we're talking about something midway through fiscal year 22, we'll be able to refine those numbers with a lot more certainty, because we will have the collections. We will be able to track where we're at. If you're looking for something within the next few months, well, then that's when we have more assumptions built in. So understanding the timing of the expectations will help us with delivering something.
Well, I apologize for the lack of clarity, Deb. I think what I was asking for is, at some point when it's all said and done,
Okay.
when we clear this all out, when you can have an appropriate accounting for everything, if we could put a number on what that delay in tolling or notice being sent out, what the additional capacity or stress on the system has been from a cost perspective, minus those points that Jim Ports made earlier. Of course, there's a transition cost that you think we're, and that revenue's been delayed, but I can't help but think, and I defer to the two financial experts on the finance committee with me, but I can't help but think that there's got to be a cost attached to delaying and processing that goes above and beyond just transition.
This is Member Ardinger, and I just want to kind of second what Member Carroll's saying. I have to agree with that. I actually think it would be helpful, if I understood you correctly, Deb, even if it's an estimate and we know it's off, if we could see the different components that play into these increased costs, and just even an estimate of how they're going to be offset, I think it would help us help me at least in my understanding of, why we see these increases, but also understanding at the same time where the income that will be received will factor into that. And I don't know if I understood you correctly. You could do something like that, taking it out to 2022, you think?
The best timing, would be when we're starting to push towards the end of fiscal year 22 for this recap, reaccounting, and we'll be able to incorporate it in updated traffic and revenue forecast, because there are certainly adjustments that need to be made there, and I believe to the positive adjustments. That would be the right timing from our perspective, the later part of the fiscal year.
And to that point, I think when we ultimately get that information, it'd be good to understand some of this was the transactional cost for the processing, but there was also the additional cost for the consultants and so forth associated with the delay. And some of these are one-time expenses, and others it's just more of a timing difference. and be good to know for those costs, which are timing differences versus one time to get that the full
Yes.
extent.
So Member Rosen, how what I'm hearing, this is how I'm interpreting it, is this accounting for costs? It's both on the operating budget side as well as the capital budget side, because the increases that we're talking about on the operating budget right now includes very, very little consultant time, because they're assisting in the development of the system, which is sitting over on our capital budget. So am I understanding the request correctly, that you're looking for an accounting, both capital and operating?
Yes, capital and operating, and what was in effect, and some of the consultants, for example, because of the delay, were probably one-time expenses that we wouldn't have incurred otherwise. But for example, the AET, at some point we were going to go all AET, just a matter. So that's really more of a pull forward than it was an expense that was just one time. You know, if we would have done it in 3 to 5 years, we just did it now because we had to.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay.
If I could, though, I would like to offer that as Deb mentioned, there are certain costs associated with AET that the original, more protracted transition plan allowed for some growth in the Easy Pass penetration rate over time. As more, like, if you look at our penetration rates on the ICC and the ETLs, they're plus 90%, whereas, you know, FMT, for example, is sitting around closer to 80%. So the more facilities we have AET, and as these mailings really start to go, we expect to see that penetration rate climb. So had we done that more gradually, we would have been able to more gradually address staffing, right? Because we do still have toll collectors on staff right now. When we went to AET, I think the numbers where we had around 124 toll collectors and 44 contractuals. We're now down to 57. But spreading that out over more time, we could have addressed both the staffing costs and more gradually ratcheted up the Easy Pass penetration. So doing this more rapidly does induce costs because you're incurring more video, and we don't have as easy of a path forward with the staffing.
Sure.
Okay.
So probably on a lighter question, Deb, just can you clarify the turnover percentage that was increased? It was realigned to 5.8%. So is that referring to that we always have open positions, you know, that are available, and that more aligns to this, that are vacant, and so the 5.8% more aligns to actual?
It's closer to actual is what it is. There's been a long time history that turnover was budgeted at 3%, and that was direction from DBM. So in this budget, we moved it up closer to what we're actually experiencing. And in FY22, I mean, we're coming off of very difficult years, and not completely through it, right? Obviously, we got to process the backlog, and we've got to process our 22 budgets. So collectively, us as a management team, you know, we're easing into 22 from an expense perspective. And that also includes filling vacancies that we've held vacant for the last year or more. Actually, it's been probably closer to 15 months that we've held vacant as a cost containment measure.
Okay, that's my question. And then just one other, more of as a point of process for Member Von Paris. So this would be an approval for the budget. However, we haven't. The item further down on the agenda is the financial forecast, which talks about revenue. So I'd suggest we maybe want to address that before we would approve the budget, since that on the revenue side, that would allow us to make sure that the budget clears all of our necessary covenants.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine with me.
Yes.
Do you have any?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea because they all fit together. And when we ask for the approval for this item and we come back to it, we would like to be able to recognize, particularly with the operating budget and the financial forecast, between now and the board meeting, we are still refining and still revalidating and making sure that we've got everything accounted for. So numbers may change slightly between now and when we get to the board meeting, and didn't want that to surprise anybody.
So just so we keep this straight, we will go when we'll go down to the item number 5. When we get to item number 5, if that is approved, then we will go back to item number 3 for seek approval there. Is that what you're saying?
I'd suggest 2 and 3 since the CTP also weighs into the financial forecast. So,
Member Rosen, I believe you mean item 3 and 4.
I'm sorry, I
Operate-
apologize. Yeah, 3 and 4. That's correct. Yes.
All right. Well, then we'll do if item number 5 is approved, then we will go back and address item 3 and item 4. Fair enough. That sounds okay. Any other questions on this at this point, in this matter, this item?
Yeah.
I think there's great discussion. I was kind of on the sidelines listening, and I thought it was some excellent points brought up and information shared. So it's very helpful. I think some of the information that is going to be, forthcoming too. So, okay, we will we'll revisit item 3, but we will move on now to item 4. Is that everybody okay with that?
Yeah. And members of the committee, when it comes to the request about the operating and the capital costs, in the coming months, we'll put together sort of like some thoughts about our approach to how we'll do it. We'll kind of lay out the framework of it and then share that with you, so that we can have another conversation to make sure that what we're putting together, aligns with this whole conversation and we don't have any misunderstandings or different thoughts, and we can make sure that we're being responsive. So we'll come back to you and share something with you, and the final product that you get is what you're expecting.
Okay. All right. We will now, just to clarify here, we will discuss item 4. We will not vote on item 4 at this point. Okay. Everybody good with that? All right. Let's we will move on to item number 4, and that's draft fiscal year 2022 through 2027 consolidated transportation program. And Jeannie Marriott is here to present. Hi, Jeannie. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
All right. Thank you.
I am here to ask for your recommendation to approve the proposed draft fiscal year 22 to 27 consolidated transportation program. Excuse me. The draft CTP was recommended for approval by the Capital Committee on June 3rd and will be presented to the full MDTA board for final approval on June 24th. The 6-year fiscal year 22 to 27 budget in the proposed CTP is $2.8 billion. This is a net increase in the 6-year budget of $90.4 million. Now, if you would please turn to attachment number 1 to see the components of this increase. I will be focusing on the highlighted amounts in the column titled Total 2022 to 2027. In line 1, we see that the 6-year budget for the Nice Middleton Bridge replacement project increased by $45.7 million. This increase is a change in the fiscal year 22 to 27 time period and does not represent an increase in the overall cost of the project, which remains the same. Line 2 is the I-95 ETL Northern Extension, which shows a decrease of $5.2 million. Line 3 is the remainder of the CTP, except for the reserves, and this group of projects increased by $90.1 million. Line 4 is the reserves, which decreased by $40.2 million as funds were transferred to fund the construction phase of projects that have reached 60% design. Line 5 is the combination of lines 3 and 4 and represents the entire capital program, not including the two biggest projects. Line 6 is the total of all projects, including the reserves, and shows a net increase of $90.4 million, which includes the rollover from fiscal year 21 of $77.8 million, which is shown in the column to the left, titled 2021. Now, if you would please turn to attachment number 2, this shows the individual project changes from the final CTP to the draft CTP. In the first category, there are 3 new system preservation projects and 2 enhancement projects that were added for a net increase of $17.7 million. At the meeting last month, I talked about 4 projects that were being added to the program. Since then, there was a last-minute addition of the DINAC maintenance contract. The DINAC system manages the tunnel ventilation fans, hydrocarbon and carbon monoxide sensors, pumps, lighting, cameras, control gates, signs and signals at the Baltimore Harbor Tunnel, the Fort McHenry Tunnel, and the Intercounty Connector. The next group is projects modified to reflect bids received. 4 contracts were lower and 3 contracts were higher than the engineer's estimate for a net decrease of $7.2 million. Next, there are 4 projects modified to add the construction phase. As design reached 60% and cost estimates were developed on fully developed scopes, the funds were transferred from the reserves to the projects, resulting in a net increase of $16.2 million. There were 3 projects completed and 2 projects deleted for a net decrease of $1.1 million. Then on page 2 of attachment 1 is a list of 38 projects that were modified due to cost changes and cash flow adjustments for a net increase of $105 million. Next, on page 3 are the reserve changes that resulted in a net decrease of $40.2 million. And then in the last section, we see that the total of all the project changes and the reserve changes brings us back to the $90.4 million increase that we saw on attachment number 1. And then I also included 2 charts. The first chart, which is attachment 3, shows the location of the projects. The Kennedy Highway facility has the biggest portion of the funding, primarily due to the northern extension of the I-95 ETLs. And then the next chart shows what are the categories of projects. We see in this one that safety and capacity improvements and bridge replacements together make up almost half of the budget, and many of the individual projects that make up the ETL extension grouping of projects are included in these 2 categories. So that also drives that those are the largest. So in conclusion, I'm asking that the board members recommend the proposed draft CTP for final approval at the next board meeting. And I know you're going to vote on this after you hear from Deb. And I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Okay, Jeannie, thank you very much. And
Okay.
We will move on to item number 5. And we will suspend voting on this at this point until after item number 5. And Deb's back up.
Sorry, trying to switch and click. Okay, so the financial forecast is item number 5, and we're requesting approval for this item. The forecast is standard. It's the same format that we've used in all prior years. It is, it's a current forecast in that when we've talked about toll revenue and where are we and where will we look like at the end of the year, we've called this an unofficial forecast. When we've had the 3G conversations, this is that same forecast that we've been using, but it incorporates the operating budget that we just discussed, the from the FY22 perspective. It incorporates the FY21 budget amendment, and it incorporates the CTP item that we just talked about. So if I go back to when we were talking about it at 3G and 3G updates during the board meeting, the changes that we made from our last official, one is that we did the revenue shift, where we assumed fiscal year 21 revenue was reduced by 72 million, and it shifted into 22 by $57 million. And so it incorporates that. And then also we had the refunding of the TIFIA loan, where we did the bond sale, and then we had an actual bond sale with what we call new money. It incorporates that. So if we go from the last forecast you approved, it has the revenue shift. It's current with the bond sales that occurred. It reflects the FY21 budget amendment, FY22 operating budget, and the capital program that was just presented. All other assumptions, growth rates, etc., in the forecast are exactly the same as what they've been in all prior forecasts. So throughout the 6-year financial reporting period, we meet or exceed all of our financial standards. We adhere to our $350 million unrestricted cash. Now, there are years that the unencumbered cash balance goes right down to $350 million, but they're also the same years in which we have bond sales scheduled. And we wouldn't sell additional bonds just to sit above a level of what our policy is. We adhere to the 2 times coverage. Our rate covenant remains above 1.0. And within our $3 billion bond cap. And so if I refer you to the attachment, it's the bottom part of the forecast in the peach area that you can see each one of these numbers. So when you look at the bonds outstanding, you know, we start out just under 2 billion, we go up to 2.8. That's within. The rate covenant is the bottom line that you can see 2.1 to 1.6 all above. Debt service is all above, is at or above 2, and unencumbered cash is at 350 or above. So what this demonstrates is it's a current forecast with all known expenses and actual activity that's occurred, and we stay within our financial standards. So there is, it's just like the operating budget. If there are, you know, minor changes to the operating budget, we will reflect that in the operating budget line. If there's a little bit of rebalancing, we will do that. But in general, we're talking about something very close to what you're seeing now. With that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions?
This member Rosen on the, so for the top line for the revenue, when did it looks like we decline in FY23 on revenues, and then it starts ticking back up, and then it looks like we stabilize, and then it starts trending back upward. When do we expect that traffic volume and therefore tolls associated with them gets back to, you know, quote unquote normal from pre-pandemic?
I would have to go back to our traffic and revenue forecast. If I use the expression largely back, we would be largely back around 2026. Then there's a time period where it stays 1-2% for an extended period of time, is what I recall. And so with the revenue going up in 22, that's that 56, 57 million. I'm sorry, I can't recall if it's 56 or 57 right this second. That's that shift that occurred into 22. And because the shift isn't in 23, it's not an actual decline in revenue. If we would have backed out the shift, then 23 would have been slightly higher than 22, and you can see the gradual ramp up.
Okay.
Hey, Deb, to Member Rosen's point, sort of an extension of that question. A new normal might exist whereby traffic volumes would stay sort of at a depressed pre-COVID level because of dispersed workforce being a thing that is more prevalent. Does this forecast calculate that in any way, or is there a way that we could somehow account for that?
Yes, especially in the early part of the forecast, there are some assumptions assuming a heavier telework model than what exists today. That is a piece of it. But with that it affects our revenue, but maybe not quite as much as it might appear to be, because a lot of the really frequent users, they're commuters. And they're the ones that are driving, that they were driving every single day. And if they're backing off and they're not 5 days a week and they're 4 or 3 days a week, we also provide a 65% toll discount, up to 65% discount for commuters. So even if it's a decent chunk of traffic when certain facilities, from a revenue perspective, it doesn't have the same magnitude as other traffic does. And so then the counter to that is e-commerce is higher than ever. Well, so therefore truck traffic is much, much higher. And so we have gives and takes is throughout the forecast. And fortunately for us, everything isn't moving in one direction. Everything's not a cut down. There's other things that bring us up.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Member Ardinger. Deb, I don't know if you have this information, but can you tell us what was the total revenue for 2019, just for comparison purposes, pre-COVID?
Chris, if you don't mind looking up the number, I want to say around 750. Okay. But every once in a while that becomes a really tricky question, because sometimes somebody means total revenue and sometimes they mean lane revenue. And so we'll provide you the total for toll revenue.
Yeah, I just want to do a comparison to the total revenue line we're looking at.
Yes, and we are in the process with having our official traffic and revenue forecast updated. That's going on right now. And that it's just like one more step that we need. We've accelerated it. We've asked for it to be earlier than normal. It's late fall. We've asked for late summer, just to validate our assumptions as well. So, Chris, do you have the number?
Yeah, 724.1 was fiscal 19 toll revenues.
And Deb, when will the The ETL extension, when will that be complete? Because I imagine that's factored in. Is that associated with this the larger jump from FY25 to 26?
Yeah. Will is the ETL's 24. Like part of it's 2 phases, but the primary is earlier than the.
Deb, I can answer the question about the ETLs. Those are budgeted out to 2029.
But they open prior to that.
Right. The revenue input for Section 200 starts in 2025, and it looks like about mid-2025, fiscal 25, because it kind of doubles after that in 2026.
But the ETLs have never been a large percentage of our revenue. So yes, it's additional money, but the ETLs also provide benefit to the general purpose lanes that we're also responsible for. So the extension doesn't move the revenue number significantly.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? All right. On item number 5, is there a motion to approve the financial forecast as presented and to advance it to the full board for consideration?
So moved, Member Carroll.
Member Ardinger, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? No. When I said no, I meant there was no, the motion carries. Sorry about that. So the motion carries. Thank you. And then we will move back to item number 3. And is there a motion on item number 3?
So moved. Member Rosen.
I'll second that, Member Carroll.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. And we will move on to item number 4. Is there a motion on item number 4 to advance us to the full board?
Member Ardinger, also move.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second, Member Carroll.
Okay, all those in favor? Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to item number 6, and that is an update on the biannual review of revenue sufficiency, and Deb will report on that.
Thank you. The revenue sufficiency, it's a board policy that the executive director or designee reports out to the board whether or not our revenue for our financial reporting period is sufficient when considering our operating budget and capital budget and debt service. And so since we just talked about the financial forecast, and because we stay within all of our financial standards, that means that revenue is sufficient. If we violated our policies, then we would either have to change our policies or it would mean that we need an increase in revenue. So without going back through and walking back through the operating budget and the capital and the financial forecast, since we just had those items, that's the conclusion of this item. Are there any questions I can answer?
Just a comment, I guess we have some work to do and certainly have some work to do over the next couple of years to try to beat the numbers that we have in place, right, to improve upon. So, but anyway, I just I wanted to acknowledge the many good questions we had here today, and also by the members, and also the comments and the response that we received from the MDTA team, and we thank you for that. So, any other questions on this item? Any comments from any of the members on this item? Okay, well, then that brings us to the end of the items on the agenda, and we will seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Member Rosen.
Rose, second?
Member Ardinger, I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are hereby adjourned. Thank you
Bye,
all very
Great week, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.